Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Russian President Vladimir Putin has wrapped up his state visit to China. Chinese President Xi Jinping held a meeting with him on Wednesday in Beijing. This is Putin's 25th visit to China, a milestone in bilateral ties. Both sides believe the meeting has led to the extension of the 25-year-long Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation with high political mutual trust, the backbone. During the Russian president's visit, China and Russia issued a joint statement seeking a multipolar world and a new type of international relations. Both sides also reached 20 cooperation agreements in other fields. The two leaders did exchange views on the Middle East situation as well. China has been keen on an international consensus for peace to help de-escalate Middle East tension. So what does China-Russia relationship seriously mean for the two countries and to the rest of the world? Joining us, the panelists coming from China and Russia in Moscow, Andrei Kortunov, who is the former academic director of the Russian International Affairs Council, and also in Moscow, Alexander Bobrov, head of the Division of Diplomatic Studies with Institute for Strategic Studies and Forecasts with Rudan University. In Beijing, He Wenping, senior research fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to have all of you joining us today. Now, if you look at the huge agenda that both presidents have managed to wrap up on Wednesday. One is the continuation of the China-Russia strategic partnership of coordination, and also this time the 25th anniversary of signing up the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. Meanwhile, we also see a number of agreements being signed. So to all of you, what does this say about the nature of bilateral relations now, Andrei?
Well, if I were to single out just one word to describe the relationship, I would probably say that this word is continuity. Indeed, Russia-China relations today is an anchor of stability in a very unstable, volatile, and unpredictable world. I think that many journalists who were probably looking for some drama, for an intrigue, or for some surprises were disappointed because the outcomes of this summit were quite predictable. And Vladimir Putin brought to China a very impressive group of state officials and regional leaders and also private businessmen. And I think that the ultimate documents testify that Russia-China relations are stable, predictable, and will continue to be an important factor of stability within the international system.
Right. If you look at the readout, Alexander, the Chinese president was quoted in the readout suggesting the relationship between the two countries has already reached a new stage of greater achievements, in his words, and accelerated development. Now, your interpretation.
Well, in my interpretation, just what Vladimir Putin said, the bilateral relations between Russia and China, often referred to as a comprehensive strategic partnership. And in this wording, every single word is important because Moscow and Beijing managed to create a robust framework for political, diplomatic, military, economic, and even cultural alignment. In my humble opinion, it is exemplary relations between the great powers of the 21st century that serve as a model to emulate by the others. And in terms of figures, the trade turnover exceeded $240 billion. It is a record high amount our bilateral relations have ever achieved. It ushers in a golden age in Russia-China relations, mainly because China for Russia is the main primary economic lifeline due to sanctions, and Russia for China serves as a massive overland supplier of oil, gas, and coal. And I believe that this cooperation can be further reinforced by new infrastructure projects such as the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline.
Professor He here in Beijing. Wenping, tell me more about your thoughts from China's perspective, this relationship, especially when Chinese presidents say greater achievements and accelerated development. What does that say to the Chinese ears?
Well, certainly, I fully agree with those opinions brought upon by our two Russian colleagues. You see the stability and the predictable and all this, I think, fully agree, because now China-Russian relations has been shown up as a model for those big powers relationship. It's quite stable. We bring this stability in this, very changeable, this world politics set up. Now, a lot of things now we have been witnessed all over in the previous years and even these years. Now, Russian and China relation, now we have seen, witnessed a very good this kind of consultation between each other and towards a lot of international issues, and also bilateral trade and also mutually investment, even visa. Now no longer need, get a visa, you can travel to Russia, just buy a ticket. So this is a strengthen our people-to-people relationship. So you can see from all rounds, now this cooperation is getting closer and closer. By the way, we are not targeting to any third party. This is very important. I'm not seeing China-Russian relationship build on, and then that means we are targeting to anyone in this world. So we just talk about our bilateral, this relationship, because China-Russia, both the big country, also the permanent member in the UN Security Council. So with those big powers relationship building on, and also show the certainty and the stability, of course, that will bring very good message to the global peace and stability.
Right, let's take a look at the laundry list for the areas of cooperation that, in fact, illustrated in the readouts between the two sides. If you take a look at this, Chinese president pointed out that the two countries should also promote the upgrading of practical cooperation in trade and investment, energy, resources, transportation, sci-tech, and also innovation, actively explore cooperation in frontier areas so as to create new engines of growth with new quality productive forces. Of course, that's a phrase coming from China. Meanwhile, from the Russian side, President Putin said the two sides have seen, in fact, a steady increase in bilateral trade, mutually beneficial energy supply and demand, the ever-deepening cooperation in transportation, logistics, science and technology, among others, and sound momentum in people-to-people exchanges. If you compare these two lists, they're very similar to one another. No wonder President Putin brought to China with him a big delegation made up of ministers and local officials from all over Russia. Now, if you look at the deliverables, Alexander, what do you think are the lower hanging fruit when the pragmatism of the relationship is as strong as the strategic one between the two sides? How do you think those promises, the laundry list on both sides, will be efficiently implemented no matter what?
Well, first of all, I must say that Mr. Putin pays an official visit, and according to a diplomatic protocol, it is the second most important type of a visit to a foreign country. And unlike the state visit that was paid last year, it is supposed to be maybe less pompous and focused on practical cooperation, which is why he has such a broad delegation of different representatives of ministers and big businesses. As you know, this visit has already seen the signing of more than 40 bilateral agreements, ranging from strategic declarations on multipolarity and trade agreements to the extension of visa-free regime until December 31st, 2027. And this particular makes it so important for Russia, because now we see the upsurge of the people-to-people exchanges that are core foundation of our strategic partnership. We see many students from Russia coming to Chinese universities and vice versa. And I believe that this will have a cumulative effect on different domains, bringing our countries together so that neither Russia nor China would consider one another as exotic destinations.
Wenping, your thoughts on the same question. How about the implementation? Yes, we saw the signing of agreement, but when it comes to real actions on the ground, what does that take?
Yes, we just heard there are as many as like 20. This bilateral agreement has been signed during President Putin's visit. Those 20 cooperation agreement has been covering a number of those areas. For example, infrastructure, like we are continue to have those gas all imported to China.
Pipeline.
Yeah, even my cooking now is using this gas from the Russia. And also like the commodity, the trade will continue driving to the new high. Even the first 4 months, now we're entering into May. So the 4 months, the previous 4 months, the trade already reached a new high. Already year on year increased almost like 18% more. For example, another area I have seen, like even our, astronauts goes to the space, those space cooperation, and even North Pole, some those aviation, and also this new access goes around that. The North Pole, that one also has been covered. So many new technology and also old one, those traditional resources industry and people to people as well, like our colleagues just mentioned. New scholarship goes to Russian students and also Chinese students go to Russia to learn different majors.
What kind of bottom line, Andre, that these kind of pragmatic cooperation provide for both countries at this time of dramatic change?
Well, I think a lot will depend on the practical implementation of the agreements that were reached in Beijing yesterday and later today. For instance, we can talk about the energy cooperation, but we know that China has a principle of diversifying its imports. And no country should sell more than 20% of the total import to China. Whether this rule might have any exceptions, given the current complications in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, this is not yet clear. I'm sure that Russia would love to sell more gas and pipeline oil to China, but whether China is ready to accept more hydrocarbons from Russia remains a question. Another important challenge is how we can move from very basic trade into more intense production cooperation. That implies that we should put more emphasis on direct foreign investment. We should work on joint enterprises. And this is not easy. I think that
there are pragmatic difficulties
on the Russian side.
Right. There are pragmatic difficulties, as we know, in a world like this. And recently, though, there is the China-Russia Expo, which is being held right now in Harbin. We heard about tremendous show up of Russian and Chinese companies there, 1,500 companies from 46 countries and regions. In fact, also including nearly 300 Russian firms were there. That's really impressive. That is interesting because it used to be border trade, China and Russia. But over the years, we certainly have seen it's graduating to a much comprehensive trade picture between the two countries who are neighbors with one another. Alexander, your thoughts on that?
Well, as I said, Russia and China stopped perceiving one another as exotic countries. And this means that we grew accustomed to the fact that Chinese business presence here in Russia is huge. And we really hope that Russian enterprises and companies would also be present in the Chinese market. As a Russian citizen myself, for example, I grew accustomed to driving a Chinese car or using a Chinese mobile phone. And I really hope that the same would apply to Chinese customers who buy different Russian products. When we are talking about different business ties, just let me remind you that Russia also hosts different events such as St. Petersburg International Economic Forum or Far East International Economic Forum, and Chinese companies are always welcome, so that they could see that there is not only St. Petersburg or Far East Russia, but also other regions, and maybe even in terms of tourism, so that Chinese citizens could come not only to Moscow, St. Petersburg, or the city of Ulyanovsk, but also to Murmansk as the part of this Arctic adventure, or to other regions of Russia that they yet discovered. The same applies to Russians. We, in terms of tourism, come to Beijing and Shanghai, but there are also other very interesting regions, such as the island of Hainan or the region of Sichuan, which are no less interesting. And this is exactly what has to be done between our countries so that our relations can keep on growing, both in terms of trade turnover, in terms of political cooperation, and of course, in terms of people-to-people exchange.
Alexander, I can feel there your wholeheartedly looking forward to the travels. All the destinations
Absolutely.
being listed out, I can tell very clearly. Andre, to you, I mean, if you look at what China is today, it is becoming one of the leaders in innovation, particularly in application of innovation for people's livelihood. For example, all those electronic equipments that people use back at home and how to work it with digitalized applications. And now, of course, simple AI also being used in some of the products sold to common people. So how do you see those can benefit consumers on both sides, both in Russia and in China?
Well, we are all used to China-made gadgets, and I also use, this notebook that I use here is China-made Honor. So I think it's already common. It's not exotic
No commercials
any longer.
here.
I see. No placement. But I just wanted to say that in terms of consumers, we are used to China's products. But I think the challenge for Russia is how to move to more intense bilateral high-tech cooperation, because Russia has its comparative advantages in terms of fundamental research, in terms of university science, and we're not as strong in commercial applications. And here, of course, China might be an indispensable partner. And it's not easy. I think it will take time. It will take a lot of effort, but the price is lucrative to become a part of this greater China's ecosystem of innovation, including IT and other very modern, very innovative technologies that are being developed in China. I think that definitely the Russian leadership is working in this direction. It all depends on the private initiative as well, on education, on people-to-people contacts, on small business interaction, and on things like that. So it's a huge undertaking, but I think that it is doable.
Right. If you look at what is going on between the two sides, this year marks the year of education between the two countries. Certainly, you see state leaders from both sides trying to emphasize, the people-to-people exchanges, youth exchanges, Professor, and also the education. Many Russian students are studying in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, and many other cities, vice versa. I've been meeting some of those in St. Petersburg as well during my last trip in Russia years ago. And of course, all the time here in Beijing, even sometimes watching movies, Russian movies together with them. So Professor, what do you think about how much an education foundation can be laid here for better understanding and sustained neighborly friendship between the two countries?
Well, yes, education and people-to-people communication, of course, is very important. They are serving as the base for building on like political trust and also trade, this improvement. So we start people-to-people, mutually understanding each other, the culture, history, and then you are hardly to push forward any other those areas, those movement. Actually, this year also marks the China-Russia education year. I saw the two presidents, President Xi Jinping, President Putin, already join the opening ceremony of this education year. I think it's very important. Actually, I also visited Russia twice. You see, we have a very close relationship with Russia Academy of Sciences. So under this Russia Academy of Sciences, they have many, many institutes. So we are linked with them. So when I travel there, I also see those Chinese students also learning, the different the subject majors in Russia. Even go back to the early time in those 1960s, 1970s. Actually, even my father learned the Russian language.
Right. It's a very different generation now. More Russians are studying Chinese, isn't it, Andre?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Though I have to tell you, I've just seen a public opinion poll on how young people in Russia and China look at each other. I think that on the average, Russians were even more positive towards Chinese than the other way around, with one important exception. In terms of language, there were about 70% of Chinese who were interested in learning Russian, and only 50% of Russians interested in learning Chinese. So maybe your language is still perceived as too difficult and too hard to master. So, or maybe we are too lazy compared to Chinese.
You know what? We can always try to learn singing the songs. It always helps, right? In a language studying process.
Oh, yeah.
As
Absolutely.
all of you know, I'm
You're
sure you
damn
can
right.
say a few words in Chinese. And going to the Chinese restaurant, it's easy, so you can order the best food that you can. But that is just one thing. You know, the visa is another thing, an extension of 30-day visa-free for both sides. That would mean tremendous vitality in people-to-people exchanges. People can just jump onto the train or onto the plane and travel a few hours and go to different cities in each other's places. That is something really amazing, especially for neighbors. Alexander.
Well, exactly. And this is why we have that good neighborly relations. It means that not only those who live, for example, in Heike and they travel to Blagoveshchensk and vice versa, but also those who live in other parts of Russia, they could see that they have different destinations in China where to travel to, be it as tourists, as students, just as guests of your country. And I really hope that the same would apply to China. We really see an upsurge of those who are interested in studying Chinese, not only in universities, because we've got different centers of sinology, but also when it comes to schools. And this is something quite new because initially it was English and European languages that were the most popular in schools. But nevertheless, even if we don't speak Russian or we don't speak Chinese, we can still use other lingua franca such as English and still understand one another, because it is the mentality of a true partnership, which is really important. I do remember that President Xi used to refer to our bilateral relations by saying that China and Russia has the privilege of standing back to one another without running the risk of being stabbed. And this is what a true partnership means, because when you do understand that your partner really has your back, has your sixes, this is something which is absolutely priceless.
Both sides this
when you
time
find
also signed a joint statement advocating for a multipolar world and a new type of international relations. And of course, both have in their talks exchanged views on the situation in the Middle East as well. For example, in the Strait of Hormuz. Andre, how do you see that the two members of the Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council, Russia and China, are in close exchanges on these important international issues?
Well, I think that the positions of Russia and China on the current crisis in the Middle East are very close to each other. Neither Moscow nor Beijing is interested in seeing Iran going nuclear, but at the same time, neither side would like to see a regime change in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think that both Russia and China stand for inclusive rather than an exclusive security system in the Gulf area. That means that Arab nations should work together with Iran in order to move to a collective security system. And we in Russia appreciate China's efforts to mediate a diplomatic dialogue between Riyadh and Tehran. I think that these efforts are still very valid and they deserve to be continued.
If you look at the situation in China, Professor, here in Beijing, the Middle East situation is at the top of the news every day. A lot of Chinese are discussing this every day. So how do you see these exchanges of views between the two permanent members of the UN Security Council frequently would mean to the better understanding and providing more pragmatic solutions to the current problems?
Oh, yes. As we just discussed, China and Russia, we both want to de-escalate those tensions in the Middle East. And also we want to see this Strait of Hormuz not being closed because it's hurting to the global economy. By the way, you see now it's not saying Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. Actually, United States also blockade this Strait of Hormuz. So we are talking not only, recently the Donald Trump also visit China. Now we are talking with our Russia partner all want to see the tension now is de-escalated. All those, international waterway should be smooth, should be all open and free. That will do good for the, not only China and Russia economy, also do the good thing for the global economy.
Right.
So we share lots of things in common. That's why.
By the way, this is we only have a few minutes to go, but this is important to point out. Since late last year, December, until now, Chinese leader already meeting with his counterpart from the other 4 countries of the permanent member of the UN Security Council, namely France, the UK, the United States, and Russia. So, Professor, in Beijing, tell me more about how do you see China's diplomatic approach at a time of dramatic changes, including this time having great conversation and exchanges with the Russian president in Beijing earlier?
Yes, I think for sure. Now China and Russia, there's 2 leadership, meet again. You see, this is Putin, 25th time visiting to China. So it's very frequent visitor. Why we need always meet 2 top leader? Because now given the international situation, it's not stable. It's not saying, wow, we enjoy very peaceful international environment. Actually, those unilateralism, use of the force, and also even trade war, all those things now is on the rise. So that's neat. Certainly needs China and Russia, those 2 big powers, especially holding on this authority of the United Nations. Yeah, cannot let United Nations being marginalized, saying some forces they want to use UN and then use it. If they don't want to use the UN and then just kick them out, put in the marginalized place. So this is not China Russia want to see. Also, this is not Global South want to see.
That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now. I'll see you tomorrow.